Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my top 5 new fantasy releases from July through September. And just to clarify, I don't mean that these had to have come out in July through September's months, but rather I picked them up. They are new for this year, they're all 2023 releases, and some of them came out very recently and some of them came out earlier in the year, and I just recently picked them up in this last quarter. I have done the same style of video for the first and second quarters, so if you're interested in seeing new releases that I picked up then I'll have this linked, and then I do the same style of video where I talk about my favorite books of the year for each quarter, but for non-new fantasy. So if you'd like something that's a little less narrow in its scope and opens it up to other genres and backlist fantasy, then I'll have those videos linked as well. And for today, because I'm going through 5 different books and I do regularly do new releases wrap-ups and individual book reviews, I am probably not going to go really in-depth with these. It's going to be a little bit more of an overview. If you are looking for more of those in-depth thoughts or a little bit more to the synopsis and those sorts of things, then those new fantasy releases where I discuss these will be linked as well. So a lot of stuff will be linked in the description bar is the main takeaway from that. But jumping into it, it was a nice mix of both adult and young adult. And I have found that I'm sure it's partly because I'm getting older, and so I'm further and further away from the target demographic that is young adult. But also, I just have found that some of the themes and the styles of stories or the kinds of plot lines that have been focused on the last couple of years in YA have not been as much to my liking. And so I still am always excited to try a YA book that sounds interesting to me. It's just not clicked as well as I would have liked this last couple of quarters, but this quarter there's some really solid ones that I have really enjoyed, I've been really impressed by, and if you, like me, find you're in a similar camp with your relationship to YA fantasy, just know that these ones, I think you shouldn't let the label deter you, I should say. And I go into more depth about that specific point in the individual reviews for both of these. But those would be Divine Rivals and The Bonesmith. So both of these are considered young adult. There's not any ambiguity. That is what they are shelved as. I do think that I could see both of these being considered new adult if we had a formal new adult age range, not because of the things that some of us typically associate with new adult, like a lot more scenes depicting details in intimacy or college, which is, I think, the two things that a lot of us think of when we hear new adult. It's not so much that, it's the heaviness of the themes, it's the amount of extensive world building in Bonesmith in particular, it's the way in which the characters, in this one in particular, the maturity of the characters, the things that they're enduring, the things that they're going through, the amount of weight on their shoulders when it comes to their family obligations and caring for themselves and learning how to fit within society. There's just so much to it that I think a lot of us can connect to regardless of our age. And then Bonesmith, I do think, has the fun and the adventure of a lot of young adult, but that extensive world building and just feeling like you're fully immersed in this different world, I think is something I typically associate with adult. I think adult, we have more patience and we let it take its time to breathe and to develop these new worlds. Whereas in YA, it's sometimes more about the characters and the action and the plot and moving. And we don't want to have those lulls in the pacing, but in actuality, the thing that connects me often to a story is those slower moments and those times to learn about the world and to hear what the characters have gone through in their lives and what shapes them and what is the reason why they act the way they do and stuff like that. And I definitely think that both of these have such a nice balance of those things. So if you like YA typically, then I would say definitely maybe look into these. But if you tend to hesitate when it comes to YA books, you're not sure, or maybe sometimes you just don't even really pick them up, these ones are going to, I think, appeal to you for different reasons, but they might still be likable even if you're not a YA reader. So I know I was focusing on that point so much. I just know a lot of you are similar to me where you're not maybe as into YA either anymore or you've just never been, but these really, I don't want that age range to deter you. Okay, anywho, getting a little bit more into the plots because I've been talking about age range so much. So Divine Rivals, I described in my review of this as Wonder Woman, the first new one, meets Studio Ghibli meets the Flat Share, which I know is a weird mix of things, but I say the flat share because in that story there's a lot about connecting and learning about another person through notes that you leave to them, through writing. These two characters, that is in a lot of ways how they get to know each other and how they connect. the World War I sort of tone and setting of this, because it's not historical fiction. It is fantasy, but it feels very much like World War I. That is where I tie in the comparison to Wonder Woman. There's also magic and gods and things like that are the reason that the war has occurred. And so I think with that magical element tied to this World War I feeling, it reminds me in a lot of ways of Wonder Woman. Plus that scene in Wonder Woman with the trenches, it's just, that's a great scene. It's the best scene in the movie. But anyway, there are some moments in the trenches that are heartbreaking and gut-wrenching, and the brutality of war, the weight of war, what it can do to families, what it can do to people, the trauma that it inflicts is captured very well. And then Studio Ghibli, of all things to associate with this, Studio Ghibli actually does often have something darker going on in the background. So Howl's Moving Castle, for example, there is a war going on in that movie, but there is this sense of whimsy and coziness and sweetness at the same time, and this blossoming romance that's just so adorable to watch unfold. And I definitely think that you see that in this. If you start it and you're initially like, hey, I don't like this guy Roman, I thought I was going to be promised this sweet love story in this, it gets, I promise, at first I was like, I don't like this guy, but it gets better. And I think it balances plot and setting and personal character development and character relationship building with the love story exceptionally. It doesn't feel like the love story takes over. That's all the book is. It's like falling in love in the midst of all this chaos and sadness and weight that is placed on your shoulders. It's very, very good. I think it just definitely deserves the hype. And then with Bonesmith, we follow a character who is eager to prove herself. She is a Bonesmith, as the title implies, and she is specifically one of the warriors within the House of Bones, or the House of the Dead. It's like there's a bunch of different houses in this book, and she wants to prove herself, not just to society, but to her father, because he is high up in the house, and she knows she's the best of the best. She kind of is a little cocky, she's got a lot of swagger, but through some sabotage, she does not get to excel and go on to do the thing that she was hoping for herself. And so she's now finding herself at this super boring post. And it turns out that the super boring post has a lot more excitement in store than she was expecting. And she ends up going on this rescue mission. And the person that she has to ally herself with is one of the people that was responsible for the kidnapping of the person that she is trying to rescue. And there's a lot of twists and turns. The character relationship building is fun. Ren, as a main character, has a lot of attitude, but I found her enjoyable, and I just think that she has a ton of personality, as do the other characters and the other perspectives you get. I just think they were all very distinct. It was so fun, just flew through it, had such a good time. I just immediately wanted to reread it because I just had such a good time with it. After that, we have a couple of our adult fantasy works. They're a little bit more serious. They're not as much good times. They're kind of slower and kind of a bummer in a lot of ways. I'll start with the one that is my most underrated book of the year, which would be The Thorns Remain. And when I say underrated, I literally mean the rating is quite low, and I think it deserves to be a little bit higher. The last time I checked, I think it was around like 3.5 something, which is pretty low. But the setup is you follow this young woman named Maura Jean. I was supposed to say Maura Jane. Yeah, Maura Jean. And her friends are taken by the Fae. And the Fae have manipulated everybody in this very small village into believing that all of these people have been gone for a long time. They left to go live their lives. They're young adults. They're trying to just find jobs and move to the city and things like that. And Maura Jean and this elderly woman in the village are the only two that know the truth. And so she is trying to find a way to rescue her friends, and she is trying to strike deals with the Fae. She is trying to do whatever she can to help them before they are so traumatized and injured that they will not even be able to live if they are returned. And she is not only experiencing this, but she still has to live her day-to-day life. They live in this tiny little rural village where it's very important that they milk the cows and that they tend to the crops and all those things that are a part of this very difficult life. She still has to carry on all those things while also trying to figure out ways to get her friends back. And on surface level, it just kind of sounds like historical fantasy. Luna has opinions. Luna was protecting me from the big scary delivery man. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So you kind of have this synopsis that makes it sound as though it's going to be this kind of generic historical fantasy Fae story, been there, done that. But you can read it as just that, but for me, so much of this was a metaphor for experiencing grief and trying to mourn and move on. And then also when you're in a very manipulative relationship, I think the way that she has to interact with the Fae is very representative of people that have to try to find ways to outsmart and escape the people that have a hold on them. So I thought it was very deep and meaningful in those ways, but some people aren't going to get that from this. And not say they won't get it like, oh, you just didn't understand. I mean, they're not going to feel that way. They're not going to think that is they're not going to interpret that same thing the same way I did, because so many of us go into books and we read different things in the books that we pick up. So I'm trying really hard. I'm like, every time I try to reword this, I'm like, it sounds like I'm saying people don't get it, and that's not what I mean. I swear, I just mean that we all take different things from the books that we read, and that was my take. That does not mean it's the right take or the only take. That's just what I pulled from it, and thus it had a lot more meaning to me. But I seem to not be very, I don't know that too many other people share that feeling, because the average rating, it would seem that that's not a shared thought. Anywho, I would still highly recommend it, and I am curious if you have read it, did you get that interpretation as well? Anyway, the next one would be The Weaver and the Witch Queen. I quite enjoyed this. It and Witch's Heart, which are both by Genevieve Gornichek, I think are fantastic historical fantasy. If you're somebody who's very picky about your retellings or your historical fantasy because you want the details a certain way, you feel like it has to follow certain plot points. If it's a retelling of a saga, then you're like, it has to have this, this, and this. I think this author has proven that she knows the material and that she has researched extensively the material or the time period or the people that are the inspirations for certain individuals, things like that. And any decisions that she makes for changes or shifts in the story or anything like that, it's always with a lot of intention. It's not because for lack of knowledge or anything like that. And it shows. I am somebody who's not quite as picky when it comes to retellings and those sorts of things, because I just want authors to have the freedom to tell the story they want to tell. And if they're building off of this previous thing and they're doing it in a way that I think is creative and innovative and different and tells a good story, that's more of what I'm looking at. And I don't necessarily hold it too much to the originals, but even I feel that this was, it really shows the difference when they have a firm grasp and a lot of knowledge on what they're building off of. So the setup for this is you follow these three young women. One of them has been mistreated by her family, and she's very eager to claim some kind of agency for herself. And she finds that in the way of this woman who is going to teach her essentially how to be a witch. And then the other two friends are sisters, and the three of them are all very close when they're children. But as a result of the one pursuing this path of learning witchcraft, she is separated from the other two. And as adult women, they come back together when one of them is kidnapped and likely sold into slavery. And so they're doing everything they can to get her back. And by everything they can, it sometimes means that they are allying themselves with people they find rather despicable, that they think are not good people. And they're getting caught up in a lot of the politics of that world, that time, you could say. And it's very much Viking-esque. It's very historical fantasy feeling. If you're somebody who likes the atmosphere that reminds you of Norway, Iceland, the Nordic countries, then I think you're going to really enjoy this one. I quite liked it. I liked the relationship between the characters, and I think I said this when I did my new releases wrap up for it, that I find that a lot of times with these sorts of stories, they are as tragic as can be. There is no hope, there is no laughter, there is no cheeriness. It's just sad, sad, sad. And this one actually had a nice balance. So I just want to throw that out there in case you are somebody who would like it if there are some happy moments in these sorts of stories. And then last, for the new fantasy that I loved of this last quarter, we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I'm sure none of you are surprised, given that I have been singing this book's praises since I read it, basically. And I just loved it so much. So I actually, when I first started it, I was like, I don't know, because I wasn't finding myself that connected to Nikuro, the main character who goes by Painter. And Yumi, at first, you hardly even see her, because she is this revered individual, and she is not even almost a person. She's just this ideal, and it's important that she call upon the spirits of her world so that these very small wishes can be granted. And these wishes entail things like, please let me have some light in my house so I can work. Like just very simple day-to-day things. And she has to give pretty much her entire life over to fulfill this task so that her world can continue to go on. And her and Painter, who's from a very drastically different world, have almost a body swap, world swap situation where they end up in each other's worlds. They can't figure out why. They don't know what the heck is happening. But it is through their connection and the way that the plot propels everything forward from then on that I really started to fall in love with it. I already really liked how unique especially Painter's world is. It's very different from what you typically see in fantasy. It has more of a sci-fantasy feel, and I loved that. I also thought the story was just precious. I thought that the way in which the characters get to know each other was super cute, and I thought the way they didn't get along at first was really adorable. To me, these secret projects have all felt rather young adult-esque, and I would say that's true of this one as well. So if you don't like the kind of charming, pure, sweet type of love story unfolding throughout your fantasy book, then it might not be for you, but I thought it was adorable. And I also just liked how unique the setting was. I really liked it. And I liked Yumi quite a bit. I liked Painter a lot more as we got to know him. And in typical Sanderson fashion, I feel like the distance you feel from the characters initially all is rooted in their personalities, what they've gone through, what their circumstances are. So as you get to know them, it just feels very organic. You're kind of just peeling the layers back. And anyway, I thought it was great. So that would be it for my top 5 new fantasy books of this last quarter. If you are interested in seeing a little bit more in-depth thoughts about any of these, like I said, I'll have my reviews and my new fantasy releases wrap-ups linked, as well as my top 5 from the previous quarters and my best of the previous quarters. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to let me know what your favorite new fantasy releases have been that you've picked up this last quarter. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.